Methanol is available globally as it's a chemical feedstock, so there's a bit of traction going on in that in some of the deep sea shipping world. Maersk Line just announced they're investing about 1.6 billion into converting some of their big container ships to methanol. Problem is, it's maybe has probably not quite some renewable connotations. Some of the can use food feedstocks to make the methanol. Can be derived from electricity through a lot of processing. It's toxic, it's flammable. Yeah, it's a couple of downsides, but the availability and it's here now, so people can start acting on it just now. Second one I'm going to talk about is ammonia. Again, big engine manufacturers are looking at ammonia as the one of the main fuels for deep sea shipping. Beauty of that is you can pack a lot of energy in it. It's got a similar energy density to the petroleum gases that we see. Yes, getting a bit of traction. There's a photograph there of an ammonia carrier, a Japanese one, photographs from Class A and K. A lot of these companies are looking at a view if they've got gas-powered ships. They're looking at it as ammonia as a drop-in replacement. It's easily produced from renewables, hydrogen, add nitrogen. There's no carbon element to it. Some of the safety issues around that is it's toxic, flammable, and corrosive. So it's got issues. So what are we doing here? There's that old sausage on the back of the screen there. You've probably seen that around Orkney. Of those people around here, we're going down the hydrogen route with a lot of our projects. Projects listed up on the side of the screen there. I've been involved in all of those. Previous to that, low carbon ferry study, Surf and Turf, which developed the fuel cell couple pier, powered the ferries at the pier. Dual ports was a collaborative project with the EU about harbour areas. ICES 3, which I'll come back to in a minute. High Dime, I'll speak more of that in a minute as we go through this. There's a High Flyer, which I've mentioned about the aircraft, which has some commonality in fueling rigs and fueling technology with marine. Reflex is the big projects going on. There's quite a lot of hydrogen transport, of course. Our ferries are looking to transport all of this hydrogen in from Edy and Shapmonsea. There's been quite a lot of engagement on that front from us. This year we have High Met. That one's just started a couple of months ago. There's hydrogen powered and solar panel cruise cabin coming up for the support of cruise industry. It's looking at some further development of the hydrogen systems on the existing Shapmonsea ferry. So that's running as we speak. Here's a quick recap on this slide of where hydrogen boats globally have come from and where they're going. The photograph on the top left is the Hydroville. It's a small harbour vessel in Antwerp in Belgium. Combustion engine that was launched 4 years ago. One below it's Bristol Boats. That's one of the earliest ones. Fuel cell boat in Bristol Harbour. Wasn't permitted to go outside the harbour area. It ran one harbour area. The top right is the Ulster Racer, which is one of the key projects for my mind. That goes back to about 2007. Fuel cell ran up on one of the rivers in Germany. Again, non-seagoing. It was very developmental. Unfortunately, there's problems with the fuel supply, so it's stopped running. So right up to date, today's date is the bottom photo there. The Hydra is the one of the Norwegian ferries intended to run on hydrogen. It's just been launched, not running on hydrogen at this moment. Some issues with the fuel supplies chain on that. And the middle one is when the all-American marine hydrogen small catamarans to run in the Bay Area in California. So that's what's been going on around the world on that sort of front. I mentioned High Dime before. One of the biggest outputs from that, we were training seafarers for running the vessels to sea in Orkney. We still believe that was the first internationally recognised certificate in the world. The copy of the certificate is up on the left there. It's for seagoing in the UK waters only. It references all the international standards for that. We have currently 8 seafarers trained to that standard, with the funding through HIMET. Want to complete that to put another 6 through that by early next year. Yes, so that was the international regulations compliant STCW code, and it's also skills development. And run by Orkney College. The photographs below, you can see we're using the surf and turf rig and the fuel cell at Kirkwall Pier for bunkering training. So we've got the guys and the crew people there. We're doing some practicing, connecting the tube trailers up, disconnecting and going through safety procedures. The photograph on the right is a fire drill under instruction on one of our vessels, where you'll see it's somebody holding out a black thing in the middle. That's they're looking, simulating to look for hydrogen flames around an engine room there. So that was that. Whether you've been keeping an eye on the press, I mentioned High C3 earlier. This is potentially the replacement for MV Sharpensea. This is the High C3 vessel. It's currently the design's being worked up by CMALS, one of the partners in High C3. The full design is going for approval in principle by March next year. This vessel here was full on hydrogen only, entirely fuel cell, and a small amount of battery backup as well. You have another part of the project is to fully test the power supply system for that, which is currently set up in a factory in Norway through a company called Kongsberg, who is one of the partners in here. This has all been delayed. There was a liquidation of Ferguson shipyard, which, if you've been watching the news, was fairly emotive at the time. They losing their partnership in High C3 through that. But nevertheless, it's revitalised, and we'll certainly be looking for partners in finance to push that forward into the build stage next year. I'm doing for time. So that's one way of decarbonising a boat. I'll quickly look at one of the others. This you might be familiar if you're around Stromness. It's really the other way of getting rid of ship emissions is you plug it in. So you've got a ship that lies alongside the pier, maybe 60% of its life. It's running a diesel generator. You get a lot of pollutants out of the exhaust system there. You get all your CO2, your nitrous oxide, particulate noise, sulfur dioxide, noise and vibration in the community. All of these things come out of exhaust, and the easiest way to get rid of it, particularly if you've got renewable energy, is plug it in. Plug it in the mains, and that sort of basically wipes all of that out. You might not be aware that a ship like that can have quite a substantial load, even when it's alongside the pier, running all of its heating, its lighting, its crew facilities, the cargo systems when they're not left to berth. All of that adds up to quite a substantial load, so we're looking to develop that. I'll move on to the next one. Final slide. So this is what you do about it. You plug it in with the mains with a system like this, part of a low carbon transport and travel project. That's a 0.75 megawatt extension lead, basically, you might say, fully compliant under IEE code to make that compliant to all the latest standards. Just have a quick go over what the LCTT was. We had this car charger, a bus charger, a cycle hub, and plus this ship system. Yeah, you would see that in Stromness. The cycle hub's not yet in place. That's to arrive soon. So looking at the potentials for that particular system that we have there, if it's absolutely maximised, that would save 800 tons of fuel a year. That ship will not burn anymore. The headline of that is that it almost entirely offsets or Orkney Ferries' entire Sharpensea, Rouse Eaglesea Wire, and a bit of the Grimsey service by just taking that out of the environment. that also equates to, just in the basic figures for the engine types, 2,600 tons of CO2 taken out, 56 tons of NOx and some sulfur dioxide and particulate matter that goes along with that. So that is one way of doing it. There are, we are looking towards, potential of upscaling that into the cruise industry. There's more movement to try and plug in as many ships as you can for as long as you can. The scale of that goes up, the voltage goes up. You're looking at, this one's 0.75 megawatts. Some of the big cruise ships are looking at 11 megawatts, and looking at engaging with some of the big renewables producers and that. That'll be a substantial ask on the local grid. And that's very briefly a synopsis of what we're doing. Hopefully that was of interest, and I've not overstayed my time too much. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, David. Spotting on time there as well. Just to say, really a lot of information to cram into 10 minutes there, so well done. And it's really nice to see that shoreside project in Stromness. So I guess if folk are wandering on the passenger able areas, they'll be able to take a peep at that. And it's really nice to see some of the other projects that you mentioned, the bus shelter and things, linking in with that project. It's bringing wider benefits. Michael will touch on some of that in a moment. So yeah, there's been a question in the chat from John Sotherington, and he's asking about methanol and ammonia and whether they're used in internal combustion engines.
Both of them are. The methanol, the ships, the Stena ships are standard internal combustion engines, as is the ammonia. Of course, one of the hydrogen vessels I mentioned, the Hydroville, is an internal combustion engine as well. So there is two streams going here that we're looking at. Also, using combustion, which simplifies the technology. That's training wise, so we don't have to reinvent people into electricians fundamentally from what was mechanical engineers in using fuel systems and big electrical drives and motors. You can use that in smaller vessels, which kind of lends itself down to the smaller fishing vessel type of things rather than the bigger scale. But certainly that's all. All of these can be used in combustion engines. There is talk of people developing ammonia fuel cells as well.
That's grand. And I think the skills and training side, that, like you were saying about handling multiple technologies as well, and we talk about skills and things in the just transition, but that training that was developed, I think it's fair to say that it very much has informed legislation and regulation and policy, and it demonstrates that kind of safety side as well. So it's really, really nice to see that those photos and actual people in action and utilizing that as well. So another quick question from Maggie here before we move on to Michael's presentation. And Maggie's asking, when does the Ham Nouveau get plugged in?
Well, we plugged it in last week, and the lights in the town stayed on, and the lights in the boat came on, that was a huge relief for me, I must say. There's a bit of snagging still to be done on that and tidying up the project. So looking about 2 to 3 weeks before it goes into full use.
And it's great. It's good to see the wider greenhouse gases in your slide there, up there, which is, because greenhouse gases, although we focus on carbon emissions, there are others there. So it's really nice to see that in that project, and also noise pollution, I suppose. So I don't know.
Being a Stromness resident, what the hell am I going to notice it?
That's it. Will you sleep with your white noise machine
being
switched off? I'm just kidding. It's great. So thank you very much, David, for your presentation. That was great. And if anybody thinks of more questions, we'll hopefully have some time at the end, or we can certainly ask them. You can ask them forward. So our next speaker is Michael Harvey. He's a senior project officer and involved in the active travel strategy, and he's working with Sustrans, and he's embedded into the council so it's a bridging role as well. But I'll let you introduce yourself more succinctly than I've managed to do there, Michael. So the helm is yours.
Thanks, Adele. I'll just share my presentation in 2 seconds. So let's check if that's on the screen for everyone, Adele. Yeah, great. Okay, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Michael Harvey. I work as a Senior Project Officer in Active Travel Strategy with Sustrans, and I'm embedded within Orkney Islands Council. This is quite a new role which just started in August this year. And I'm here to talk to you about the importance of active travel in helping to address the climate crisis. So I thought I'd start with a slide just about, what is active travel, because I know it's a phrase that's heard a lot, and it maybe doesn't make an awful lot of sense on the first listen. So it's really about making journeys in physically active ways. So it could be about walking, cycling, wheeling, or scooting. Mostly younger people enjoy scooting, but so any of these kind of ways of getting around from A to B, making purposeful journeys, not really leisure journeys, but trying to access the shops and facilities and services we want by active means. So really in a nutshell, it's about getting around under your own steam. A wee bit about Sustrans just to begin with then. So Sustrans stands for Sustainable Transport, and we're a charity set up back in 1977. And our aim is to make it easier for people to walk and cycle. Sustrans' vision is a society where where the way that we travel creates healthier places and happier lives for everyone. And therefore our mission is that we make it easier for people to walk and cycle. And we do that in a range of different ways, as I'll come on to. So in particular for this evening's presentation of the range of impacts that our work leads to, impact on climate is the key one, and that's achieved through reduced road transport. But for Sustrans as well, fundamentally, it's about some other things around improved well-being, improved physical health, and stronger social connections within a place. All things that Sustrans believe make happier and healthier lives. So to achieve change in travel behaviour, Sustrans and in this case myself, we work in 3 different ways, and in Orkney what this means is working with communities in the places they live to try and understand what the barriers are, what the things are that stop them from being able to travel actively, and working then within the council to help inform policies, to bring funding in from external sources, and to try and deliver projects which address these barriers. So that's a wee bit about Sustrans, but now in terms of active travel and the climate crisis, I put together a few slides here just to explain why transport emissions matter. So we come back to 1990, as this graph does here, we can see how the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland, what their source was, and you can see the top one there, energy supply, was very much the largest contributor until quite recently. Due to switch from fossil fuels, that's reduced dramatically, and domestic transport is now the biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland. So it's something that needs to be addressed if we want to tackle the climate crisis effectively. In Scotland, as you can see from the diagram on the right here, in Scotland, cars actually cause 40% of the transport emissions. And many of these journeys are actually very short. More than half of them are between 1 and 2 kilometres. So it's clear that the private car and the use of the private car is something that needs to be tackled on a national scale if climate commitments are to be made. Now, as many of us all know, the car is a really important vehicle in Orkney because many of us live in rural areas, and there are a range of other barriers. I mentioned that phrase earlier, barriers to travelling actively that we might experience in Orkney, and I've just noted a few of them here. And the car is a great way of addressing a lot of these and why it's so popular here. So we've got the prevailing wind and rain, short days in the winter, fast roads and safety concerns, potentially long distances to reach those shops and services and community facilities we need to get to, and limitations in our public transport network as well. And there will be more. There'll be more issues. Everyone will have their own barriers that prevents them from making those journeys. So a transition to electric vehicles is a really good thing for us. It'll help to contribute towards achieving net zero. And I'm convinced that the car will remain an important part of the transport mix in Orkney. However, even if 100% of new sales were electric vehicles by 2030, modelling shows that car mileage would still actually need to be reduced between 10 and 20% to meet the climate commitments of the government. Electric vehicles won't do very much to help solve some of the other issues I mentioned earlier that matter to Sustrans and charities like us. So things like addressing sedentary lifestyles, road safety and pollution from particulate matter. And it's also the case that too many motor vehicles can also put people off wanting to spend time in a place, which can be bad for business and bad for tourism as well. So in Scotland, as I mentioned, more than half of the journeys are between 1 and 2 kilometres that people take in a car. And I suppose it brings a question, is it possible to switch some of our journeys more easily than others? I think it's fair to say that those of us who live in towns and villages within Orkney are at an advantage here if we want to change those journeys. It's much harder, I would say, to make a journey if you live way out in the West Mainland and you need to get into town for your services. So those of us who do live within walking distances have a big advantage here. But you know, what are the barriers? It's something I'm really keen to learn from people now that I'm started in this role up here. You know, what are the barriers, the things that stop us from feeling able to make those journeys if we want to, and what would actually make it easier to do those? And again, if you do live in the countryside and find it difficult to access the shops and services and facilities you need, and perhaps the public transport network isn't quite as convenient as it could be, are there things that you can do to get from place to place once you arrive in your destination, which helps to reduce your carbon footprint? For example, parking in one location and walking or wheeling, whatever, to your different services rather than taking your car and moving from one car park to another. These things can all make a difference. So walking, cycling and wheeling have great benefits for our physical and emotional health. That's been proven, and it's good for our bank balance too. And it can help us to feel more connected to those around us as well, which is a really important thing in terms of well-being. I think an important point I'd like to make is I don't think it's all or nothing. It's not about all of the journeys that we take having to be active journeys. Every journey we take can make a difference. So by walking and cycling instead of driving for even a small number of our journeys, we can help to reduce our carbon emissions. And in a place like Orkney as well, with the barriers I mentioned earlier, electric bikes are actually providing an ever more attractive alternative to take some of the effort out of cycling too. So now just a wee bit about my role here in Orkney with Sustrans, which is part of the Strategic Partnerships Programme. And first and foremost, my role here is to work with communities and to understand what they want to achieve. Some people will be keener than others, and some barriers will be different in one place to another. So I'm here to learn and to listen. I want to develop my understanding of the barriers by working with and listening to communities and seeing if there are things that we can do to help in terms of shaping policies within the local council here, or in terms of trying to bring in funding to deliver projects. In my previous role with the council, I worked to bring Sustrans funding in for a number of projects, and there's a photograph here of one with Bob McKenzie and a group of other people involved in the Arcadia Park project in Kirkwall. And this was one where we were able to install some footpaths and cycleways to help make the most of a kind of relatively underused piece of space. It was certainly cherished by those who lived around that area, but wasn't very publicly accessible. And that now provides an opportunity to get off the busy road network and enjoy a much more peaceful environment to get from A to B, from your house to the hospital and further on into town. So I hope that by working with communities in this kind of way and understanding what they're trying to achieve, I can hopefully start to deliver some more projects with the external funding, which has been rapidly increased by the new by the SNP with the deal with the Greens. It's now 10% of the transport budget, which means that actually the overall budget for Scotland is going to quadruple. So hopefully that means there's an opportunity there, but It's about listening and understanding to what people want to see happen, if anything. A few photographs of Arcadia Park today, just for anyone who hasn't been there, to give you an idea of the environment. So the role of communities. I think I've just got about a minute left. So this is about how you can help to make it easier to travel actively in Orkney if it's something you're interested in. So I've mentioned about being keen to understand what these barriers are, the things that stop us from using, our feet or our legs to get around. And I would encourage you to look out for the Orkney Matters project. This was advertised a couple of days ago in the press, and this is an opportunity to come and tell us about these things. Additionally, since 2015, the Community Empowerment Act came in, and more funds are being provided directly from governments to community groups, actually bypassing local authorities. So there potentially could be an opportunity that I could help groups to make more efficient use of that funding by matching it with external sources such as Sustrans, who have a funding arm as well. There are other ways you can get involved in terms of if you're interested in this subject and this topic, you can have a look at our Twitter and Facebook pages. You can have a look at our website, and there are lots of articles there, and feel free to share those with other people. You can tell your employer about the Way to Work website, which is a really interesting resource in terms of encouraging employers to help their colleagues and staff to travel actively. And there's also some resources for people involved in education as well. So I'd encourage anyone who's involved with that, or knows people or has people in their families, feel free to have a look. There's lots of really interesting stuff. People can volunteer with Sustrans because we're a charity, and there's one of my colleagues there, the volunteer programme coordinator, Lisa, is someone who'd be helpful if anyone's interested in speaking to her. And just in general, if you want to find out more about the sorts of infrastructure projects that we've delivered up and down Scotland, you could have a look at the Sustrans Showcase website. And I assume Adele will share these slides afterwards, which have all the links in. Also, just a quick link to a partner organisation who have a development officer who recently started in Orkney, Magdalena Kolu. And she's involved with the Rural Connections programme. And whilst in Sustrans, my role is about trying to basically develop infrastructure to make it easier to walk and cycle. The Road Cycling UK is a little bit more, I would say, focused on trying to help people to overcome those barriers that they might experience. So it can be things like family cycle training to teach people. And family, they would go to your family group where you live and cycle those areas with you and help you to feel safe in doing so. There are learn to ride sessions, health walks, and really interestingly too, there are e-bike tryouts and bike loans as well as adapted bikes. So I can't probably do justice to the work that Magda is going to be doing up here in Orkney, but she would be really keen to hear from anyone who's interested in having a chat. And then just lastly, I would say if you're interested, if you don't get out about as much under your own steam and you're interested in the benefits of doing so, why not try taking that first step? Because every journey does make a difference. Thank you.
That's great, Michael. Thank you very much for that. Lots of great information there, and some nice actions that people can take at the end there to kind of get a bit more active. A good point from Jeannie there about maybe making buses cycle friendly as well, so people can connect their routes. And John there making a comment about active travel schemes, about continuous funding, and then pathways there, having funding, coastal pathways that are eroding. So perhaps a link up there. I think some of the key points there about cycle to work schemes. I know that if the business is of a certain size, that there's subsidised way to get a bike. I know I took advantage of that myself. I actually got an e-bike through the cycle to work scheme. It's brilliant. Like you say, it takes the sting out of the windy days if you're averse to physical activity in that manner. But so there's lots of things like that. So yeah, if I'll put a link to the Orkney Matters campaign in the chat box as well, and you can any comments from across the evenings, feel free to include that. So there are there's a section in that consultation for any other matters. So it doesn't have to be anything that's directly in the questions, but if you have something to contribute, then you can. So thank you, Michael, for that. And I think it was lovely to see as well the Arcadia Park. They are a really lovely redevelopment for people that use that. So it certainly takes me off that busy roundabout if I'm cycling to and from as well. And I think I wouldn't be alone in using those green spaces during this COVID pandemic. It's been quite nice to have, you know, pathways that seem rural and a bit safe. You're not walking along a busy road. So it's really lovely to see those developments and how kind of biodiversity and active travel has been considered right from the planning of those, which I know that you've been involved in as well. So do feel free, Michael, if you want to put the SUSTRANS links in there. I've got one from Roy there. Yeah, about community facilities having no pathways and again speed limits, which you kind of touched on in your presentation there as well. So really good points in the comment, and obviously a matter that people are interested in and it's important to them, so that's great. And then we'll move along. We're on time, which is great, to our last but by no means least speaker this evening. So Sarah Pimenter, who works for Community Energy Scotland, and Sarah is the Orkney projects leads there. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, Sarah, and you can start sharing yours.
All right, thanks, Adele. You'd think after a year or so of lockdown I'd have online sharing sorted, but still seem to be struggling. Oh, slideshow, that's what we want, isn't it? Okay. Great, thanks for bearing with me. Hi folks, yeah, as Adele says, my name's Sarah and I work for Community Energy Scotland, and I'm going to be presenting to you about some of the work that Community Energy Scotland has been doing around community energy transport and electric vehicles. I must confess, these rather lovely slides are not my own creation. I'm standing in for my wonderful colleague Evelyn Lee. So again, apologies if you're expecting Evelyn. I will try and fill her boots for this evening. Also, a heads up, my cats are also very opinionated on community transport and electronics vehicles. I've asked them not to say anything during the presentation, but I can't guarantee, I'm afraid. All right, so we're starting off by having a little reminder of the UK government targets for electric vehicles. The first one being in 2030, there'll be an end of sales of new petrol and diesel cars and vans. And then shortly after that, in 2035, all new cars and vans will be zero emissions from the tailpipe. And so with those targets, we're going to go on to have a look at how Orkney's doing in getting there. So here's a snapshot of where we are at the moment. Orkney has over 17,000 vehicles, of which 11,200 are cars, of which 330 are electric vehicles. So we've still got a way to go, but have made a fair bit of progress over the past 5 years or so. And Orkney's actually got the most electric vehicle charging points per head of population in Scotland. So we're well set to sort of be developing that infrastructure at the moment. However, as Michael pointed out earlier, whilst electric vehicles are a good lower emissions alternative to diesel and petrol cars, we shouldn't necessarily be looking to be replacing all of these vehicles with electric vehicles for numerous reasons, in that we want to be trying to do more active transport, you know, reduce the total number of journeys that we're making by cars, and also from the point of view of the embodied emissions that we have in the vehicles that are made. And so that, with that in mind, we'll move on to talk about a bit about the community transport projects that we've been doing. So the aim of these projects is to increase the mobility in the community. And these projects are run by the communities for the communities. And the ones that we're working jointly with at the moment are the Island of Hoy Development Trust, the ED Partnership, and the Shappensea Development Trust, usefully highlighted there on that map. With, as well as being for the community, also aiming to decarbonise the islands and increase service flexibility to the islands. On this slide, we've got a couple of photos of the vehicles that we have as part of these projects. So the ones that you can see here are funded by UKRI through the Reflex project. And these vehicles are 1 7-seater and 1 5-seater with wheelchair access. So the ones with wheelchair access were the original 7-seaters, but they've been retrofitted to allow vehicle wheelchair access as well. And I think there we go, another little photo there. Yeah, and as well as providing wheelchair access, I think these sort of the larger boot space there has also been found useful for the communities for the different types of activities they use them for, which we'll come on to in a bit. So initially, when we started looking at these community transport projects, we had in mind getting larger electric vehicles out, sort of larger minibuses out to the islands for transport. However, on consultation with the communities, we found actually that multiple smaller EVs would be preferred over one larger EV. For a number of reasons, for easy access to some of the properties, to allow multiple different trips at the same time, so that one vehicle can charge up whilst the other one's in use, and also just because a smaller vehicle was enough in most cases. So we can't have electric vehicles without electric vehicle chargers. And under the same project, so again funded by UKRI through the Reflex project, each of the communities has also had double EV chargers installed to allow charging. Some of these are available for use by the wider community. And it's also worth noting that as well as allowing the electric vehicles to operate, we're also hoping that by increasing the electricity demand, by using the electric vehicle chargers, we could hopefully reduce the amount of curtailment that the local community wind turbines experience by increasing the electricity demand, and also by increasing the amount of renewable generation. In terms of what the vehicles have been used for by the communities, transportation of people, obviously, but also the delivery of goods during lockdown. So I believe there are some meals delivered by the community groups, medical supplies, which was really sort of useful during that lockdown period where people couldn't get out and about quite so much. They're also being used to gap fill and supplement statutory or council services, and also being used for school buses as well. So I mentioned we're also looking to reduce the number of vehicles rather than just go for a one-for-one exchange of diesel petrol to electric vehicles. And one of the ways of doing that is through car clubs, which is essentially a group of people sharing the use of one or multiple cars. With as well as hopefully reducing the total number of cars going out and the embodied emissions surrounding that, also reducing the number of vehicles on the road, promoting more active travel, as Michael was talking about, reducing the tailpipe emissions, and to give you an idea of just how much car clubs can help us in that respect. 269 tonnes of carbon was saved in Scotland in 2020 from the use of car clubs. So it's not just a nice thing to have on the top of a magazine. They are really helping make a difference. Car clubs in Orkney. So the first all-electric car club in Orkney was run by Rousey, Egglesley and Wyre Development Trust. And we've also had Orkney Housing Limited had funding for setting up 3 co-wheels car club locations, one in Doonby, one in Kirkwall and one in Ham. And obviously car clubs are great to have, but people need to be able to access them. And unfortunately, unlike sort of areas in like London, where there's a lot more around with the car clubs that we have here, you do have to return the cars to the same position. So there was a survey done here looking to see where people would find the most useful locations to have car clubs, and mainland ferry terminals were deemed the most useful locations. And with that in mind, in addition to those 4 car club locations pictured earlier, there are additional 2 car club locations being added in the past couple of years, again as part of the Reflex project using UKRI funding. The first of which is at Kirkwall Pier. So this was set up by Community Energy Scotland with the idea that by situating this by sort of the Outer Isles ferry terminal, it will reduce the need for people to take a car on the ferry, so reducing cost and increasing the likelihood of people being able to get across. Also, hopefully reducing the number of vehicles kept at the Kirkwall Pier and just making it easier to get out and about in Orkney. The second location, funded by UKRI by the Reflex project, was set up by EMEC and is in Stromness at the Oric buildings. And again, it's placed near a ferry port and is another transport option for residents, local businesses and visitors. And if anybody's interested in joining up to the car clubs, then there's a link there at orkney.com. If a car club isn't for you, there's obviously also buying or leasing an electric vehicle. Electric vehicles are still quite expensive, even second-hand, and so buying one outright might not be attractive or possible. And even those second-hand EVs that are on the market, there's still only quite a small number at the moment. And possibly as a result of this, leasing is becoming more popular, as it can allow you to sort of spread the upfront costs over a number of years. And here's a rather lovely photo of an electric vehicle. I imagine that's at Finstown, I think. So moving on. So yeah, there's quite a number of different options when it comes to electric vehicles. It's not one size fits all, but hopefully this gives an overview of how we can go about sort of incorporating electric vehicles into communities as well as individual use. And I hope you found that interesting. Do feel free to contact Community Energy Scotland if you do have any questions around sort of community projects that you would find interesting to find out more about. Thank you very much.
Great, Sarah. Thank you very much for that presentation. And I think I love that piece of information that Rousey, Eaglesea and Wyre were the first all electric car clubs. Those little nuggets of information that are really great. I was just going to ask how people could find out about the Co-Wheels Car Club, but you had that on your slides, so I've popped that in the chat as well. And it kind of what you were saying and what Michael was saying in his presentation as well about not having to do an all or nothing type switch, and those car clubs can be quite good, if you have visitors or you need a short-term vehicle and you kind of have I suppose a no commitment rental type of situation, which is good, and you get an all-electric vehicle. I personally signed up just to have a shot of the BMW vehicle, so you can have a shot in vehicles maybe that you wouldn't have in your day-to-day life. So yeah, it's a really great resource work from yourselves at CES and the Reflex project, and it's just lovely to highlight that community element that you've done. And I think I suppose I've worked with David on the ferries projects, and that value of the local knowledge in those projects can save so much time, effort, and money, and make sure that those resources are the right things, like what the community were saying there about just splitting the vehicles in half, basically. And yeah, so it's even just small nuggets of information like that can really change the landscape of those projects as well. So yeah, Michael's shared the SUSTRANS website in the chat there as well. Does anybody have any questions? We've got a couple of minutes or so across the board for any of the speakers tonight. Don't be shy if you do have anything at all, or any comments even, that's absolutely fine. I did have one question I was going to write. I think, yeah, the other thing that we've kind of discussed is that supply and demand side, I suppose, and those projects kind of balancing the electricity, you know, both in terms of generation and terms of use. I don't know if any of the speakers have any comments maybe on that, or not brave enough to not keen enough to tackle that. I see David's got his mic off.
One thing I was taking in the last two speakers in terms of transport planning for the for the future. You know, obviously there's been a lot of talk about having new ferries, and we must update these. It is really, you know, what are we going to update them with? How many cars are we going to be moving in the future? We're going to be less. We're going to be more. I mean, the previous assumptions would have us believe there's a growth pattern that's been established for couple of decades now, all along. You know, is that going to continue? Is it going to drop? It may actually the like what they call the STAG, Scottish Transport Guidance, you know, process. You know, where you predict what you're going to need for the next 20, 30 years and design ship sizing and accommodation and all the needs for the type of vehicles you're going to transport. It makes it quite difficult. You know, when STAG 1, the first time that the government looked at providing new ferries back in 2007, it was easy because basically it would have been a diesel-powered ship, and the growth projections would have been straight up. But now the uncertainty is coming in. Like, is it really going to carry on like that, or what is going to happen? Are we going to start using less vehicles about, or how are we going to be moving goods, and what type of fuels, or you know, what type of dangerous goods? We're not going to have hydrocarbons. We're going to be moving hydrogen. We're going to be moving ammonia. You know, all these have different risks. It's actually it just puts a whole lot of confusion in, and how we're going to plan it for the replacement ferry fleet, as well as, you know, the road vehicles, which has been talked about as well, and, you know, cycling and all of that. You know, do we need more space for bikes? And they type in these small battery short range vehicles. Are they going to be moving on ferries, or they're not? They're going to be hubs. So it's actually it's a really interesting, challenging time for if you're a transport planner at the moment.
Yeah, really pertinent points there, David. And like you say, I think, I don't know, when you look at these long range projections, they often don't come in maybe right for the 5 years or so, like you say, but it's really interesting about that mix. So just a couple of comments in the chat box there about linking up transport routes, which I think we had a little bit earlier on as well, and just kind of, I suppose, making it easier for people to get on their bikes, making people feel more confident. I guess I'm reading into that comment from Maggie there. Yeah, there's a comment from Tom about wondering about getting involved with electric vehicles, new electric vehicles. I must say I did see the new electric Ford Mustang parked outside one of the garages in Kirk, so I look forward to seeing that on the road sometime soon. Yeah, road upkeeps with the kind of larger size electric vehicles. Does anybody know if electric batteries are being tested for smaller sized boats for outboard engines, etc.? I don't know, David, if you have any comments.
Yeah, there's a company called Torqeedo, a German company that offers electric outboards. I'm not sure what the power range is, but certainly they're there. Again, it's how big a battery you want to carry around with you, and what your boat's capable of. I mean, some years, about 5 years ago, I did say, like, looking at the one out of North Isles ferries use about 3 megawatt hours a day. So to put the batteries in, that would have been about 150 tons, so we would have sunk it. So you know, slight problem there. If we had gone to full electric, you know, there is electric ferries. You know, there's particularly Norwegians have a few. The new the design, the High Seas 3 design, Seamal are looking to offer that basic design and fuel cell, and also like a full electric for routes that have charging facilities at each end, and potentially some whether there's some hybrid propulsion system with diesel or other liquid fuels at some point as well. So yeah, there are the options are there. Again, as I say, we're not even at the Betamax VHS choice yet. It's not even we're before that.
It's grand. We're at the gramophone stage.
Pretty much, yeah, we're just making music, you might say. Yeah.
That's it. Great. So Turkey Joe, there you go. You heard it here for that size. I think as well, once that fuel mix changed, you know, with the E10 fuel coming in, there was a lot of folks with different size outboard engines for other applications, and they were not sure about what fuels and things to use. So small changes like that can really boost other tech coming forward. And I think hydrogen as well has that way of reducing battery size. I think that's maybe a key element that we might see as well. What we've seen with the hydrogen vans, you know, the battery only needs to be a fifth the size if you have a hydrogen fuel cell on board. So there's all that kind of more nuanced tech that's coming in there as well. But yeah,
certainly Toyota are looking at mass production fuel cells in the none too distant, so would probably see quite a bit more fuel cell vehicles starting to become available. So whether that demand pushes through hydrogen refueling stations more widespread than probably the very limited availability you've got at the moment.
Great, brilliant. And that brings us right up to time. So thank you again for all our speakers and a really great range of different transport applications, all the way from foot up to cruise liner ferries and outboards and things there at the end, community transport, cycling, a few resources for people there as well. And yeah, so there's some lovely comments coming for you speakers as well in the chat box. So thank you all for your time. Tomorrow is the last event. So we have adaptation is tomorrow. So we have a speaker looking at the coastal situation in Orkney, a little bit about climate change in the planning process, and then we have a representative from the Stromness Museum looking at adaptation more from a species and collection side, and adaptation of practices in different organisations as well. So yeah, thank you all again for giving up your evening, and do feel free to get in touch with any of the speakers, or I'm happy to push comments through. We have a mailbox, climate@orkney.gov.uk, and the officers here are open to being contacted, so please do feel that you can get in touch, and have a great evening.